if you have a bad lease, you're never going to be successful. I don't care how great a business you operate, the lease will kill your business. And if for some reason you are not successful, and if you have a great lease, you do have some ability to salvage some value by potentially selling or assigning that lease.
Welcome to another episode of Wisking It All. We're joined today by Alistair Levine, CEO of Vine Hospitality.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to come and talk to people about what we're doing.
Yeah. I always like to start with, how people got into the hospitality industry. I think it's always fascinating to see. So I'd love to hear your story. What brought you towards hospitality in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a family that was in hospitality. So at 2.5, I was making pizzas on the counter at Il Fornaio, and where my dad was the CFO, and he was there for a bit. Then he went to Gordon Biersch, and so you just kind of grow up. I then went and did other stuff for a good period of time. I worked in luxury audio and home automation. Look at a completely different industry, and then ultimately got dragged back in through the pandemic, ended up back in sort of restaurant tech and back office side of the business, and then ended up taking over the restaurant side in October of last year.
Wow. So I'm curious to hear. So for people that haven't heard of Vine Hospitality, tell us a bit about Vine Hospitality specifically, the different concepts, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so we've got 8 restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. We've got a French brasserie concept called Left Bank. The oldest one of those is 31 years old, but 3 of them are older than 20 years old now. So it's like a really long time brand. Then we've got LB Steak, which is a steakhouse, and we've got 2 of those. And then we've got Meso and Rolati. Meso is Mediterranean, and Rolati is kind of contemporary Italian-American sort of concept. So, a wide range of concepts currently. Which certainly has good and bad to it in terms of scalability on that side, but definitely means that we're in a lot of different sort of consumer buckets and have a variety of sort of guests that we're talking to on that.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of people don't realize the complexity of let's say a 10 hospitality group with 10 venues that have 6 concepts versus just 10 of the same concept. It's night and day.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was doing the back office, we were outsourcing some of the financial preparation labor, and one of the companies that we evaluated, they their sort of claim to fame was that they were doing all the CPKs, and pretty quickly in the process, they were like, there's more variation between 2 locations of the concepts that you're supporting, because we were doing all independent restaurants. We did about 150 independent restaurants at the time for bookkeeping, payroll, HR, et cetera, all the unsexy back office stuff. And they were like, yeah, between two different versions of your 2 different clients you're supporting, or even two of the same clients, different locations, there's more variability between vendors and coding and all these other things than across the entire portfolio of CPK.
That's crazy.
So that just, I think, encapsulates the challenge that independents oftentimes have.
Yeah. Totally agree. I know I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you invested in your first restaurant at 8 years old. Most kids are saving toys.
It was 7, but who's counting, right? Yeah. So it was, the first restaurant my dad did by himself was Left Bank in Larkspur. It took him 2.5 or 3 years to raise the money to open the restaurant. Your first is always the hardest, not surprisingly, right? But it took him a couple years to raise the money. And I was, doing bake sales and lemonade stands and all the other stuff that you kind of do as a kid. And, felt bad for him. And so was like, hey, here's $200. I don't know if that gets you any closer to, having no concept at that age of is this going to have any real impact or not? But yes, it's kind of funny that it started there, and who'd have thought, 30 something years later, I'd be back running the group, right? Wouldn't have been what I would have guessed at the time. But
Awesome.
yeah, I mean, I think to me, like, when you grow up in the business, you sort of realize just how much stuff you kind of inherit osmosisly, just like sitting at a dinner table. We ate out 2 or 3 times a week. My dad was unable to switch off. And so it was like, okay, well, oh, they have too many people on, or, oh man, that's nasty. They're putting fingers in the glass, or, oh, they should have done this, or, oh, this is chintzy in the way they're doing this, or whatever it is, right? Like there's just so many little details that, as a kid, you don't necessarily like think about consciously, but you learn to sort of look and examine the operations of a restaurant in a way that I feel super fortunate to have sort of grown up in, and I think it's why you see a lot of successful restaurateurs oftentimes, despite them being slightly nepo babies, if we will, like there is some benefit to that, or can be if it's harnessed correctly. And a lot of like Will, his dad was Will Gardiera, his dad was a restaurateur, and now he's done all these incredible things. I think like there's it's not an uncommon story, because I think the business is there's not a lot of like formal education that really is successful for the business, a lot of hands-on education, and so depending on when you start learning that, it can really be this huge competitive advantage. I sort of look at working in other industries as the same way, right? Like I think so many people in restaurants sort of look at the industry with sort of blinders on, right? Because it's like they've worked in this industry, and to their credit, they've worked in this industry all their life, and have been wildly successful on that side. But I think having some understanding about how other industries function, because we're a fairly siloed industry, I think is really helpful, especially tech or sales or any of the HR, any of the areas that I wouldn't say restaurants are like thriving at on a macro basis.
I love that. I think there's like two good takeaways in what you said there that are really powerful. Just to kind of reiterate to the audience is one is that idea of just surround yourself by the right people. In this case, happened to be your dad, so you were automatically with him a lot. But if you surround yourself with the right people, and closest 5 friends was the saying that the closest 5 friends will probably show you who you are, kind of thing. So that osmosis thing is a real thing. And then I think the second, which makes a ton of sense, is sometimes being able to work in adjacent industries and come back gives you a different perspective as well. Because you see how different industries might do things, and it might give you a different perspective. So I really like that. One thought that came to mind was you were mentioning how the first restaurant is always the hardest, and I've heard that before for many people. But I'd love to hear from your point of view to kind of we have a lot of restaurant operators listening in. Maybe you could shed some light on what is that turning point from first restaurant to the next hump and then the next hump. Like, where do you see kind of the stages from X to Y to Z?
Yeah, I mean, I would say still learning every day. So there's going to be a bunch of stages I won't know yet, unfortunately, right? That the goal is always to get there, right? But so I think raising money for the first restaurant, if you have to go and raise the money, is always really hard, right? Because it's a high failure, high risk industry. Getting people excited to give you money and having them have confidence that you're going to give them their money back and generate a return, which is what investors want, is not easy. I mean, my dad prior to that was the CFO of both Ilfreniyo and Gordon Biersch, 2 very well-known, well-regarded things, had a Stanford MBA. So very well educated on the finance and business side, which I think is where a lot of operators fail, not just in our industry, but the reality is in any of the creative professions, most creative people are not necessarily the best at operating a business. I would say, depending on what type of operator you are or what type of owner you are, if you don't know the business side, either find a partner that does or find a great outsourced provider that you're going to be really confident in. But you've got to at least be capable at the business side. Otherwise, the creative side can only take you so far.
Fair enough.
But I think, so obviously the first one's really hard. Then 1 to 2 is hard because you're basically like doubling everything. In general, I have the philosophy that anytime you double the size of your business, you break all of your existing systems. So what works well for 1 no longer works well for 2. And then what works well for 2 no longer works well at 4. And what works well at 4 no longer works well at 8. And then, somewhere in the 12, 16 range, you're going to break those same systems. And then would guess at sort of 25-ish, you start to break the same systems. And I don't know where it goes
Right.
beyond that, but we
Right.
could assume 50, etc. Right? I think at some point you just sort of have the systems, and I'm not sure that, if you're going from 300 to 600, you're materially breaking things in quite the same way. So I would imagine that would fall off. I just don't have the experience to say specifically, but I think, it really comes down to, you think about at one location, it's just figuring out how to get everything up and going. Then when
Yeah.
you go from the first to the second, it's okay, how do I get confident enough in my general managers or my managers at each of the locations? At least we're in full service fine dining. So some
Yeah.
of this also is going to be a variable based off scope and scale of the business and the type of segment. At least in full service fine dining, where we're doing 3, 4, 5, 6 million or more in an individual location, that 1 to 2 becomes hard because you need to basically create a whole second team. How do you get the culture from the first team to the second team? How do you make sure that that's successful? And you don't yet really have above store management to like, there's no director of ops. There's no, right? Like all of that infrastructure does not exist yet, only with 2 locations. That starts to come in at 4, but now you're starting to have middle management, which you start to have then, the door open, at least in California, for litigation and employee claims. Because I generally have the philosophy, people don't sue people unless you're really heinously bad. But like they do like suing companies because it's sort of this nameless, faceless thing. And it's like, well, the owner's never here, so like screw them, they're just getting rich, right? Or whatever that thing is. And so it's what you see claims start to rip up on sort of more of the ticky-tacky side around that 3, 4, 5 location as you start to have that, DO, some of the above store infrastructure starts to come in that sort of 3 to 5 location range. And then, you go to multiple DOs and you start to have these layers of management as you get closer to the 8 to 10 unit range. But you're also, needing to start thinking about, depending on how quickly you're growing, do I need a director of construction or a head of construction? If I'm going to open a restaurant every year, it's probably worth considering some of those other pieces of infrastructure. How do you start thinking about private dining sales or marketing or any of these sort of things that oftentimes at 1 or 2 units you might have just simply outsourced or not even considered? And now you're starting to bring on additional people on your team. So who are they reporting to? How are you managing them? You need to start thinking about really building out process, because from 1 to 4 you're sort of, hey, you're relying on whoever the employees are in the building. From 4 to 8 you're sort of thinking about, okay, you're still only relying on the like above store leader levels. Beyond 8 you really need process and systems, otherwise doesn't matter how awesome your team is, it's just too much stuff and too much things to keep track of to do successfully. So I think those are at least from where we've been, where we see that there's real hurdles. And the people that I'm actively talking to now who are further ahead than me in that 12 to 16 range, that they indicate that that's yet another sort of, you start thinking, hey, you might have restaurants regionally. You're no longer within driving distance to all of your restaurants, or you may have other challenges that start to pop up in that range, and those systems really start to be tested, and you've got to sort of continue to double and triple down on them.
Well said, really well said. And, there's a lot of people that maybe only have their first restaurant, maybe second. So if we zoom in a little, what are some lessons you learned going from that first and second to maybe that next big jump that you can maybe share, or things to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, so I can't take too much credit because I wasn't the one who grew it. My dad grew it from 1 to 5, and then we had a different CEO grow it from 5 to 10. And then I've pared it back a little bit as we had some deals that weren't successful. Look, I think fundamentally that you could never redo your lease if your landlord relationship's not great. They're really a partner in your business unless you're going to own your own real estate, which is a whole. We'll just set that aside in a separate bucket for right now, right? But if you're not going to own your own real estate, your landlord really is a business partner, and you need to think of them just as if you were validating any other business partner. Like, if you have a bad lease, you're never going to be successful. I don't care how great a business you operate, the lease will kill your business. And if for some reason you are not successful, and if you have a great lease, you do have some ability to salvage some value by potentially selling or assigning that lease. So, I think getting that right attorney who's going to be part of those lease negotiations, making sure that you manage them well so they're not just racking up a massive legal bill for you, but like do not sign leases with personal guarantees. Do not sign leases without an attorney reviewing them. There's some basic things that I certainly, both on the back office side and seeing what competitors or other industry peers have done, those are some like huge missteps that can be like relatively easily avoided. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, whatever, we'll figure it out, and it's a great spot, and right, and it's like you can end up in just an absolute world of pain where if you've personally guaranteed something, that landlord, if you're unsuccessful, and look, businesses fail all the time, and sometimes they fail for totally non-rational manner, right? Like we all the time will put a menu item on and be like, oh, this is going to crush, and then it doesn't. The same thing can happen with a business, right? You can just be the wrong thing for the wrong people at the wrong time, no matter how good, how experienced you are. So don't forget to do it's really exciting to open new stuff. Don't forget to do the downside risk mitigation step and really think about, okay, if all of this blows up, what is the worst that will happen? And make sure that the worst that will happen isn't, especially if you're going from 1 to 2 units or 2 to 3 or 4, isn't that the entire thing goes away, right? Because you will have lost all of that foundation that you have built rather than, and we all take missteps. We all, hey, this is a new concept or this is a new thing, right? So that's where I stress, again, it's really about building your team, right? Sort of back to, hey, you're the sum of the 5 closest people to you, right? Like you should have a great attorney that you really trust, that you have a great working relationship with, and they should feel empowered to tell you, hey, this is a bad deal, or these are provisions that you cannot say yes to, and don't sort of put on the rose-colored glasses and be like, oh, this is going to be amazing, and then it's not, right? And so I think from the 1 to 2 unit range, that's a critical piece. I think the other critical piece is talk to your guests. Like, I think the reality, and staff, truthfully, like they all generally want to provide feedback, and the way you're going to grow the business is you're going to get passionate guests coming in repeatedly and consistently. And if that's not happening, you should be asking people, hey, what can we do to get you in 1 or 2 times more per week, per month, whatever your sort of frequency might be for your average guest. I think those are really critical. And then sort of the last sort of pillar I would say is, going back to sort of the business and finance side, is you got to look at the numbers. Don't, hey, once in a while, maybe we'll get, somebody on the family to create a P&L, and we're going to do that once a year. And, oh, we got money in the bank account. Like, look, it's just, if you don't look at the numbers on a regular basis, you can't manage to them. You will not have an idea when, labor costs go up or, food costs goes up, and you won't be able to, this is an incredibly agile business. What happened 2 weeks ago might not be what's happening today. And if you don't know what's happening even 2 weeks ago, you can go a long period of time where you're just lighting money on fire. Unlike other industries, like if you were, if you worked in manufacturing of something, if you made way too much product, that product still has value. If you ordered way too much food or you spent way too much on labor, sorry, in a week or two, it's gone. And the labor's gone basically as soon as you spend it, right? So I think that's where it's just so critical to be looking at that information and to be empowering your team with that information, because the reality is, sure, if you have one restaurant and you're just an owner and you're the owner and you're the owner operator and you're there every day, sure, you might need to be the only person looking at this information. But as soon as you go to a couple and you have managers, empower them with the information. And if they're going to just leave, or if they, they're like, oh, I want a huge raise because I see you making all this money. If you're truly making all this money, and they're a critical portion of that success, well, then you should consider that might be a good use of funds, right? And not saying to just pay anybody whatever, but this is ultimately a people-based business, and if you've got people who are critical to your success, figuring out what that looks like is super critical.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The team around you will many times make or break you. And then with the lease, that's some good advice. I've had friends that have, in the industry that have been burnt that way, and, first time restaurateurs, and, didn't take the advice you just gave, which is double checking, not leading too much with the emotion, having an attorney review things. Actually, where I live in Miami. In Miami, it's super common for restaurants to take on crazy expensive leases because it's Miami and they're excited. And it's like,
well, just everything's going up, and then all of a sudden, like there's way too many restaurants, and Miami's a little bit got some headwinds at this point, right?
yeah.
Like, so yeah.
Yeah. And back to your point is like, yes, okay, you could be somewhat emotional, but you got to look at the numbers, right? If you start doing the math on the rent and what you got to sell, you look at your percentage points, average labor costs, average food costs, depending on your industry, whatever, and you start doing the math, you got to also be realistic and be like, okay, what? Sure, there may be a lot of foot traffic here, but can I actually hit this amount of sales consistently? It's like,
well, I think you always got to start with building a model before you take it on, right? How much, if I need rent to be between 6 and 10% occupancy cost,
yeah,
how much do I have to sell for that to be true?
yes,
How many seats exist in the restaurant? And what does that mean the check average per person? And how many turns might I have to do to hit that number, right?
yeah.
The reality is, if you're modeling 3 turns a night, you're probably going to be unsuccessful. Like, if you're modeling 2 turns at lunch, you're probably going to be unsuccessful. You could have the hottest restaurant, but those are like extreme outliers. You can't build a model that only shows that being the case. And then back to sort of the risk mitigation or downside, like, you got to look and see, okay, well, if sales are down 20%, can I still make this business make sense? Maybe not at a wildly profitable level, but at least at a break even and subsistence
slow periods, right?
Right. And sometimes you're going to have, hey, we've had recessions, weirdly enough, right? Like they happen, right? And so I think, to me, so much of it starts there. And I think that doesn't take away from the fact that the food needs to be awesome and the beverage program and whatever the other pieces of the puzzle need to be. But those are actually all easier to solve than a lease. A lease is not an easy to solve problem. If the food sucks, it's pretty easy to hire a new chef and completely redo the food. Now, consumers may not immediately notice that, but it's a relatively solvable problem compared to if your lease sucks. Like, guess what? You're signed to a legal contract. This is not an easy to solve problem, right? And so I think that's the way, at least we look at it, is like, okay, how do you figure out what needs to be the most, like, what are the things that you can change the lease? The build out of the space. If you mess up the build out of a space, it is incredibly expensive and time consuming to change the build out, right? That's not something you're like, oh yeah, no problem, we'll just do that tomorrow, right? It's a matter of like really, really digging into those pieces.
That makes sense. No, really well said. And this is good advice. Like I said, I'm a big fan of just helping our restaurant and bar audience just kind of think about these things and hopefully shed some light from people who've lived it. And so thank you for that super sound advice. One thing I want to pick your brain about that I think can help them is KPIs. You're running many restaurants. What are some KPIs that you think of when looking at an individual, but also then looking at it at a group level to understand how are my managers doing, how are my restaurants performing? Obviously, I got some ideas, but I want to give you a chance to share because you're living it right now, and it could probably resonate more.
Yeah, I mean, I think KPIs are going to be different based off different concepts, but at a core level, I can speak through sort of full service fine dining. What we look at, right, for us, it's very much what are sales, and then how are we comparing those to the prior week and the same week prior year. So, we think that those are what we always want to see is, are we growing sales year over year? And and what direction are we trending in? Are we a down week? Are we an up week? Are we a flat week? To compared to like where we're at, right now. Because hey, you might have an economic change or portions of the year are busier or slower. Those are things that all naturally happen. The other piece of that is we look heavily at guest counts, because what I don't want to end up with is, and that could be transaction count if you're in the sort of QSR space, et cetera. But what you don't want to end up with is just ratcheting up price. So your sales are going up, but you're actually serving less guests. That's not the sign of a healthy business. That's the sign of a business that at some point you're not going to continue to be able to take price, and you're going to watch that sort of bubble pop, and you're going to see these major sales declines as you sort of price your consumers out of their value band that they think you're at. We then also really closely look at prime cost, which in our world is basically half of that is cost of goods sold. We look at that not just at the overall level, but then on a category spend basis. Because what we want to understand is, hey, did we spend more as a percentage of sales on meat last year or this year? Thus, we can be a little more targeted. And if we do need to take price, where that might happen, if we need to look at different suppliers, what we need to look at, right, gives us a little bit more granularity. Because to me, all of these KPIs are awesome, but the reality is it's all about what can I learn from this information to make an operational change to drive a better result. And if I'm not doing that last step, none of the KPIs matter. So to me,
it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, it's like, so how do we figure out how to sort of align that as closely as possible? And then we look at labor, we look at front of house and position type labor. We have targets, and so we have budgeted numbers for all of these things, so we can also comp against budget
versus budget
as well as prior year. So those are sort of the key starting point KPIs. From there, you can kind of start to peel the onion back into things like server productivity and performance for us. What's the number of items they're selling? What type of items are they selling? So are they selling beverage, which is more profitable for us, and not selling food? Like what might that look like, right? So that we can identify where best practices might be and who our best servers are, and give them the best sections and the best periods of time, so we can drive as much incremental business as we possibly can. Because generally on Saturdays you're going to be busy and full. Hey, you want to have your best servers on Saturdays so that they can make the most money that they can possibly can, but you can also sell the most stuff you possibly can. That's very much sort of where we net out. Those would be the high level KPIs. From there, you can start looking at guest sentiment, turn times, sales per labor hour, both front of house, back of the house. Like there's a lot you can start to dig into. But I would say, at least if I was setting up new KPIs for a restaurant and I was a brand new restaurant operator, I would challenge them to understand, okay, what is the operational action that this KPI I'm hoping to have drive? So, hey, labor's too high. Okay, I need to look at how our costed schedule looks like, and is our sales forecasting good, to determine where the problem is. Is it just people showing up when they're not scheduled? Okay, well, why are we letting them clock in then, if that's the case, or whatever that might be, right? I think those all give you some clear ability to sort of drive from that point in time.
Makes a ton of sense. And I know, you touched on your father. I think one thing that's always interesting is the learnings you can get, watching your father maybe start the business and grow, Vine, I think it's Vine Dining and Vine Solutions, but just in general, seeing him kind of start the business and grow. What's maybe one lesson from him that still guides you today?
I mean, the lease thing is a huge one. He was a ferocious lease negotiator and did a lot of it as a consultant. Okay. So that's certainly one. I think, look, the core to me is these are businesses. And so, he was focused on running them as businesses. And I think that's a huge still core for us, right? I think, again, they are a business. They need to be run like a business. Business needs to make profit. You measure what matters. And when you highlight and have those discussions, there's an emotional and sort of science, there's a science and magic portion of hospitality, right? There's a certain vibe when you walk into a restaurant that doesn't show up on a P&L, right? But you're like, oh my God, this restaurant feels hot. This feels awesome. The food's amazing. Those things don't show up on a P&L. So we've always got to be balancing both the sort of P&L worldview, which is the very business, financial standpoint, with remembering that we still got to provide great hospitality and memorable experiences for guests to get them to come back over and over again. And so... And that's a hard thing for restaurants to sort of manage, because we have so many people coming in that we don't actually know who are coming in, right? Unless every single person is making a reservation and we have all of their contact information, or they're on our loyalty program, or any of those types of things, there's so much information we don't know about so many of the people that we interact with. We've got to make some of these educated guesses. So I think those two, it is a business, but then how do you blend in some of that magic of the lighting is incredible, or the music playlist is and what I would encourage most operators is, most people are going to sort of make a restaurant in their vision, right? So like if you're a culinary person, the food might be awesome, but some of the other pieces are going to be
Right.
weaker, right?
Right.
If you're more of like a nightclub promoter getting into restaurants, of which there's plenty of that, like I'm sure the music and the lighting and like the scene's going to be
Right.
on point, but the food and some of the other stuff might be missing, right? It's really hard to do all of it really well. And I think, for us, we've still got a long way to go, but this is where you start to think about how you build your team. I'm awesome at this thing. If I spend more time doing this thing, we're going to be wildly successful at this thing. How do I start to find people who are great at the other pieces of what it is we're doing as you build and scale the business so that you can have a more well-rounded, balanced sort of experience?
Yeah. So well said. Totally agree with that. Switching gears real quick, we're obviously in tech at Whisk. I know you were in tech as well, in the restaurant tech. But I know it could be overwhelming for restaurants, right? There's a lot out there. There's too much. There's POSs and this, and there's companies like Whisk doing inventory, and there's staffing, you name it, right? There's a lot. So I'd love to get your perspective from the operator standpoint, because you've lived a bit of the tech side too, but from the operator's standpoint, what would you tell them? What would you tell operators that often resist tech? Because I know there's some truth to resisting some of it, but like, what advice can you maybe give them?
Well, so I'd flip it a little bit, and I feel like restaurant tech has sort of dug their own grave on some of this stuff, where there's a lot of overpromise and underdeliver across the industry, and a lot of the tech's just not very good because you sort of have restaurant people and tech people, and I sort of have joked that never the two shall meet because you have like tech people who are like, well, yeah, your chef will just go in and spend an hour entering data into this system. And it's like, yeah, that's never happening. So like, yeah, we can just stop the conversation right there. And then a lot of the operator side that really have these problems that need to be solved, where tech could really have an impact, they don't know how to develop technology. And so you have this problem. So I think that's historically how that's worked. It is moving in the right direction. Like the reality to me is, we have to, as an industry, find ways to become more efficient. Labor's not getting cheaper. Cost of goods is not getting cheaper. Like all of these things are going to continue to put pressure on the P&L. And that's not to say like, oh, go just spend a ton of that money then on tech, etc. Yeah. But I think the reality is figuring out how to utilize technology as a force multiplier is critical. And so to me, oftentimes that starts with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And I think this is where operators at sometimes just sort of hope and pray that it's like, hey, there's this silver bullet, and if I sign up with Whisk, all of a sudden my inventory is going to be amazing. I don't have to do anything for it, or whatever the answer might be, right? And I've seen it over and over and over again, and we're guilty of it, internally, even at times, right? So it's, what's the problem you're trying to solve? How is this going to make your team's life either better, more efficient? Like, are you saving your team time? If you're not, you better really be delivering a lot of value because they don't have a lot of time generally at the store level, right? And so what is the problem you're trying to solve? Once you've determined the problem you're trying to solve, it makes it way easier to go shopping for what it is you might think a technology solution should do, and then really beat up that technology solution. The other thing I would always say is, figure out who's using the product that isn't on the tech company's referral list. And that oftentimes is just, hey, have some conversations with other operators in your market. I know that as an industry, we're a little bit insular and we don't talk to our peers nearly as often as we should. But this is a great area where, hey, how is this going? Because the reality is, most tech salespeople will tell you the product is perfect and there are no warts and whatever. And the reality is, there's a lot of inventory products, just as an example, out there. Some are going to work really well with Toast for this segment of the market. Some are going to work really well with Aloha for this segment of the market, right? And so again, having clarity on, okay, where are you today? Where might you want to be tomorrow? And what is the problem you're solving? You can start to ask really specific questions about, okay, well, how well do you integrate with my POS of choice? Do you integrate with my general ledger software? Do you, like, whatever the problem we're trying to solve is, right? Like, I think that's such a critical portion of technology. And then I think the other piece for me is technology should enhance hospitality, not diminish it. And this is an area where restaurant tech really could some expertise themselves on that side, because so often it doesn't, it takes away. But the reality is, like, there's a lot that technology can enable, whether it's, tracking consumer preferences or other things like that, that should allow us as operators to deliver a far superior outcome for our guests and for our employees and empower them to deliver those great experiences. But again, if we don't know what problem we're solving for, and we don't sort of keep that at the forefront, that's critical. The other thing I would say is there are very few companies that are master of all, but integrations are also challenging in the space. And oftentimes they'll be like, oh yeah, we integrate. And then it's like not fully deeply, completely integrated. It's sort of ad hoc. And so those are areas that I would push on. But again, I think a lot of it goes back to talk to your peers. Like, you're going to know who are the most savvy tech operators within a market. Like, have the conversation with them about what's working, what's not working, where might you want to see something, where might you not want to see something, and then don't try and do all of it at the same time. Pick a thing, figure out how you're going to roll it out, get it rolled out, determine, is it delivering the success you thought it was, and if it is, great, then you can do more of either the same thing or look at a different category. But don't try and do it all at once, and I don't think all-in-one providers are not the move in general. So
yeah, well, no, super well said. I could tell you've lived it, because I very much feel very very similar. So it's I can tell you live this experiences, and it's tough. On the flip side, on the tech side, it's tough because you want to stand out, and I agree with you. I do think most companies totally overpromise and underdeliver, and it's like, how do you convince people you're not the same? And for us, one thing we did is like, okay, let's just put our money where our mouth is. Let's give people a 60-day money back. So don't take my word. Don't take the testimonial. Obviously, the testimonials are going to be good. I'm not going to put a bad testimonial on my website.
Of course. I mean, like, no one would be like, oh, yes, we suck. Let's put that on the website, right? Like,
so I'm always like, at least this way, you judge for yourself. You got 60 days. And I totally agree with the sentiment of, like, there's no catch-all, right? Like, if someone's coming in, they're full service. That's actually what we do really well. They're full service. Their beverage program is important. We'll be like top one or two. They're coming in and they're, 1,000-unit QSR. I'm not going to lie and sell them and then put ourselves in a pinch, and
I think that's where restaurant tech's got to do more of that, picking the right clients. But It also goes back to, and this is sort of the flip side on the restaurant side, is every edge case is not a critical thing. Right. True. And I think where restaurant tech gets itself in trouble is like, yes. You actually, as an operator, look to work with some of the people who tell you no occasionally. Right. If they tell you yes to everything, actually, I think that's a red flag. Now, they need to tell you yes to the critical pieces of what you're trying to solve for. But you want to get some no's, or you want to get someone to say, hey, let me go look into that. I'm not sure. I don't know where that's at. Is that in the development sprint or whatever that might be, right? And look for somebody who's looking for feedback and wants to get better, because ultimately tech as a product, it's not fully baked. It's always evolving. And what features tech is going to add is going to be driven by consumer feedback. But restaurant tech gets itself in trouble when they just want to say yes to everybody, and like, it's like, oh, this one operator does this slightly weird, different thing that no other operator does. It's like, that one operator probably should be a little flexible. And like, unless they've got a really compelling reason for why whatever the way they're doing it is the way that, like, the industry should do it, there's going to be things, you got to be like, both parties need to be somewhat adaptable. And I think that's where both parties get themselves in trouble with each other, is they're too, well, this is how I've always done it, and then this is a tech, I need to do it the same way I've always done it. Well, the way you've always done it might not actually be good. Like, let's preserve that might be an option, and think that could be potentially the case, right? And I think if that's the case, then you can be a little more open-minded. And again, it goes back to, what's the problem you're solving? Who are you solving it for? What's the stack? I think there's a lot of ability to figure those portions out. But like, both parties have to be working together and figuring that out.
Totally agree. It's funny sometimes when restaurant partners ask me, "Hey, Angelo, like, come on, just be transparent. What POS do you recommend?" I'm like, I can't tell you what POS because you got to decide. Number one, are you a QSR, are you FSR? What type of venue are you? How many venues do you have? What's your main thing? I'm like, write down. So the best advice I typically give them is like, write down your top 5 non-negotiables that you need from this POS system and focus on that. Because if you just start getting demos, you're going to get confused because then you just start seeing random things that you didn't even need. They might be selling you on online ordering or on loyalty, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they got loyalty, when it wasn't even in your top 5. So that's my biggest tip to people is write down a top 5, top 10, whatever it is. So if the POS doesn't have that, I'm saying POS, but any tech company doesn't have that thing, you don't get lost in the bells and whistles. And you're
totally. Well, look, I think one of the companies I would say is doing the best of like really being clear about who they are and who they're for right now is Q. They're very clearly like, look, we only want to talk to you if you have 35 units or more and you're a QSR. And really at 35, it's like you better be a growing brand. But
right.
like but they're very clear about who they're for. And as a result, they've been able to go incredibly deep in the features and functionality those operators care about. And what's the commonality across, hey, 90% of them really care about this, and this. Well, now I can build a really robust, really clear use case for them. But I have to say no to a lot of people in order to focus and have that depth, right? And I think this is where it's hard. It's like if somebody's telling you they do enterprise and small business really well at the same time, unless it's 2 completely separate departments, I'd be really suspicious of that. And again, this goes back to, okay, well, who's listed on the website? If it's tons of if it's Burger King and, Taco Bell and whatnot, and you're a single unit operator, they're probably not the right pick for you because they're not going to be used to working with companies that have teams and floors of people to just interface with them, right? And you're going to have oh no, I've got 12 minutes right now. Could we hop on a quick Zoom, right? And so I think that's again, it's just being rational and realistic about that. I think the other thing is, use that network. If you've got kids, they're going to be more tech savvy than you are oftentimes as an operator, as depending on their age, but have them go and validate and some of this stuff, right? Have them be part of the process, right? I think tech is, as I say, it's gotten this bad reputation within the space. It's not going anywhere. We're going to see more of it, but it's figuring out what's going to be the most successful, etc.
Yeah, I love that. As we wrap up, I got one more question for you, and then I want to end off by just plugging so people can find you on LinkedIn, check out your website, learn more about your hospitality group. So we'll end off with plugging you. But real quick, last question for you was just if you had to give one piece of advice to a new restaurant owner trying to stay profitable in today's market, what would it be? And let's stick to FSR, I guess, because we're
I think you got to watch the numbers, right? I think that's got to be the starting point. If you're not watching the numbers and you're not watching them daily, weekly, that's the cadence you got to be watching them at. You're gonna. It's really, really hard because you got to be so agile. And if you're waiting until an accountant delivers you a P&L once a month, 2 weeks after the end of the period, it's gonna be 6 weeks before you can make a change. And if you're spending an extra $2,000, which doesn't seem potentially like that much if you're doing $5 or $6 million a year, but if you're spending $2,000 extra on labor for 6 weeks, guess what? You just lit on fire $12,000, right? And those numbers just get really fast, really big, really scary so quickly if you're not looking at it daily, weekly. I think the other thing is the reality is this is a people-based business, and you've got to empower and you've got to set your team up for success, especially if you want to grow the business. And I think there's high turnover in the space. There's a lot of headwinds around that, but I think everybody can feel when you walk into a restaurant and the vibe's right and the staff are happy to be there and they're having a good time and you're going to just have a great time then, right? And we've also all walked into a restaurant where we're like, oh my God, this feels like a funeral parlor. And everyone doesn't want to be here right now.
Right.
And that's fine, but be reasonable and rational about which one you are and then figure out how to fix it. Right. So to me, it's the numbers plus that piece. If you can get those 2 things right, you're going to be pretty well placed as long as you've got that solid lease that we talked about.
Well said. Well said. This is awesome. Alistair, I want to end off by just, letting people know where they can reach you. So feel free, website, LinkedIn, just drop it wherever people can find you or more about Vine Hospitality.
Yeah, so I have musings on LinkedIn, just under Alistair Levine. You'll find me pretty easily. It's a fairly unique name. So I have a fair amount of like sort of blog posty LinkedIn posts. Feel free to dig into those. If you got questions, shoot me a DM or reach out. And then our website is Vine Hospitality, VINE Hospitality .com. You can check out the concepts and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, I think we're just we're trying to figure out how do we build and scale a restaurant group in California, which is not always the easiest thing to do. So.
I love that. Well, Alistair, thanks again for joining us. For everyone listening in, this was Alistair Levine, CEO of Vine Hospitality. We'll include all the links so you can find him, following him on LinkedIn, check out the website. So thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on.
If you want to learn more about Whisk, head to whisk.ai and book a demo.